Hello, I'm Stadia Stremska and you're watching the Press Corner, coming to you live from Warsaw on this bright Sunday morning. In this program, we look at current events from various vantage points, letting our audience reach their own conclusions. Today, I'm joined by Anna Kalczyńska, journalist Goniec, Małgorzata Zawadka, journalist, US correspondent for Polish media.
Hello.
And Michał Piękoś, journalist, Dziennik Trybuna.
Good morning.
We're going to cover three, perhaps most crucial news items of this week. A, presidential elections and a referendum in Moldova. Then Zelenskyy's peace plan. And, of course, EU's newfound resolve to tackle illegal migration. So, of course, we're going to start with Moldova, as it is today that Moldovans cast their votes in a presidential election as well as in a referendum on the country's path towards the EU. All this is happening against the backdrop of the Russian influence and meddling in Moldova's affairs. Before we embark on our discussions, let's take a look at the gist of the story.
Voting is currently underway in Moldova, and the country's future in the European Union is at stake. In addition to electing their president, Moldovans will also answer the question of whether EU accession should be written into the constitution as a strategic goal of the state. Moldova's pro-EU president Maia Sandu is seeking a second term, running against 10 other candidates.
The European Union is, first and foremost, a project of peace, and this is what we have to explain to those around us. All Moldovans want our communities to be better equipped to have basic living conditions. With EU support, we can do things much faster.
Sandu is the favorite in these elections, although experts believe there may be a second round. Next in line are former Prosecutor General Alexandru Stoyanoglu, backed by the Socialists, and the moderately pro-Russian Renata Usati. The vote is overshadowed by fears the process could be compromised by Russia. Police have uncovered a widespread vote-buying scheme where tens of thousands of citizens are being paid to vote against Sandu.
For the month of September alone, the police have recorded more than $15 million in transfers to these individuals. We are talking about a platform of over 25% of the voters in the Republic of Moldova, so it plays quite an important factor in the electoral process.
Many Moldovans believe that closer ties with Russia would benefit the country.
It is a geographical and historical situation that makes it much more beneficial for our citizens, for our country, to cooperate with the Russian Federation, because the Russian Federation is our strategic partner.
Just like neighboring Ukraine, up until 1991, Moldova was part of the Soviet Union. Before the war in Ukraine, Moldova was entirely dependent on Russia for gas and received most of its electricity from a Gazprom-supplied power station in the separatist region of Transnistria. Transnistria declared independence from Moldova in 1990 with Russian support, and 3 decades later the country still hosts some 1,500 Russian troops. The international community does not recognize Transnistria's self-declared independence.
And before we start our discussions, we're going to cross live to Chisinau, as we have our correspondent Karolina Stolzman on the ground there. Good morning, Karolina. Could you please give us a recap of what's happening and what is the mood on the ground?
Good morning, Sally. So we are outside of the polling station where Maia Sandu, the incumbent president, has casted her ballot this morning. Now, the atmosphere as she approached the building was quite uplifting, I would say, as people were chanting around Sandu as she approached the school. Then she came in to cast her ballot, where, of course, lots of media was awaiting her to record the footage. And then she came out to speak to other media representatives, where she urged fellow Moldovans to go vote, to take charge of their future, to be the ones that dictate the terms of where their country is going, to not let anyone else make these decisions for them. However, interestingly enough, she has not answered any of the questions asked to her in English. Now, when it comes to recent polls, according to CBS research, Sandu can expect some 36% of today's votes. However, there will be no exit polls known until at least midnight, as no company has been commissioned or registered to carry them out. But the information that we do have comes from the Moldovan Central Electoral Committee, and that is the information of the voter turnout. And around 12 local time, it currently stood at roughly 19%. Now, various observation missions have been sent to these elections to make sure that they are carried out legally legally and lawfully. And a non-governmental Moldovan organization called Promolex has observed just this morning already 173 violations. So far, these mainly included people taking pictures of the voting, of the ballots, group voting, unauthorized people in the voting stations, as well as advertisement and election materials within 100 meters from the polling stations. Other than that, the election so far seems to have been running quite smoothly, but of course, the situation continues to be dynamic. Now, these elections are quite important, and especially when it comes to the referendum, because this is a chance for the Moldovan people to decide whether they want to cooperate fully with the European Union or whether they want to lean in towards Moscow, towards Russia, to strengthen that relationship, to see how this can turn out for them and for their future. Back to you, Sally.
Karolina Stolzman reporting from Chisinau. Thank you very much. Well, and now it's time to dig in and discuss the elections. My first question would be to you, Anna. I was wondering, why are these elections so important? Important to the EU, important to the US, of course, to Poland as well?
Well, this is like a wake-up call for the EU, definitely. We have seen and we have observed that Moldova has been struggling for decades now between the pro-European aspirations and also pro-Russian influences. So, so far, actually, Moldova has been left with indecisiveness of EU, basically, because actually this membership in the European Union, it's still not on the table. Of course, the ongoing negotiation undertaken in 2004, I guess, are ongoing, and there has been the association agreement signed, and there has been this deep and strategic free trade agreement signed as well. But still, the EU has somehow left Moldova in this grayish, very difficult geostrategical situation, with many influences from the Kremlin. As we know, lately there have been even arrests because the Kremlin sees it as a perfect opportunity to dig in deep pockets of their warfare instrumentum, and so. The cyber attacks ongoing, and defamation and disinformation campaign, and also illegal funding of bribing even people who are going to vote.
One man worth mentioning, Ilan Shor, right? That's the person causing some trouble in Moldova. Michał, what about your take on the issue? Why is Moldova so significant?
Well, we saw with Ukraine what happens when a country tries to be between two blocks, when a country tries to be between the West and the East, between Russia and the EU. It's just not possible. It's just not sustainable anymore, because Russia's hunger for power, its imperialism, its very aggressive stance towards her neighbors means that it is not longer possible just to be located between the West and Russia and to have a peaceful future. It is just not possible. And what we are seeing, and then let's remind our viewers that Russia is occupying swathes of Moldova, a really big chunk of its territory called Transnistria. And the posture is very aggressive. You see Russian soldiers on the ground, Russian military checkpoints. Life over there is very difficult for civilians. So Ukraine is showing us either, for Moldova, it's going to choose the path towards democracy, towards the West, EU, NATO, or we're going to see a repeat from Ukraine, and we're going to see some kind of invasion or some kind of hybrid warfare, which is on a smaller scale, but taking place already in Moldova. So very difficult, very precarious geopolitical position we have where Moldova is located. And they have to act. They can no longer stay in this limbo between on one side Russia and the West on the other side. They have to choose, and it looks like they've already chosen, because when you look at the opinion polls, vast majority of Moldovans, they want to go towards the West.
That's over 60% apparently, but of course we'll know more after today's vote. Now, Maia Sandu is supposed to win. I guess there should be no surprise there, but you never know, 10 other candidates. But even if she wins, do you think that this will be enough with the parliamentary elections happening in 2025? Małgorzata.
I have no idea, to be honest. This is like, I will leave it to my respectable colleagues who are obviously know better, much more on the subject. So this is, from what I can say right now, we are in this, I call it the Bordeaux moment of, this is the Tibetan way of, you know, the being between. And we are just looking where the world will end up, with the democracy's ink or autocracy's ink. And each country is saying, so far in Europe, we are hanging that maybe the democratic countries are, you know, falling into this, I would say, network of countries that will support the democratic values and liberal values, but we really have no idea. With the information going into, I would say, actually, when I was reading about the Russian influence, the Russia buying Moldovan votes, Russia is buying American votes with Elon Musk's money right away, because he's paying $100 for each person who would sign the so-called free speech vote. So, like, everyone is meddling with such a strange way of putting their you know, we are using the words that means free speech, but everyone could understand it completely opposite. So with your question, what will happen in 25, we will see where the algorithms are, where the different countries are, and most of all when the American election is, and who will have the biggest influence. And if Elon Musk gets a lot of influence, the richest person in the world, the misinformation and the disinformation could be so, we don't even know what will it lead. So.
Right. So I'll just perhaps explain my question further a little. So in 2025, Maia Sandu's party will perhaps get a significant percentage of support. However, they will have to form a coalition with someone. And now there's this big question with whom, because there's no other party that will be so pro-EU as they are, meaning that Maia Sandu will have about half a year to try and impose some further reforms, tackle corruption, which is also quite prevalent in Moldova. So this brings me to my next question. What are some of the challenges in the country, and do you think they can be addressed in such a short time span? Michał, perhaps you would like to...
Well, it's a very poor state of Moldovan army. Moldova at this moment doesn't really have armed forces in the way we see it in Poland. It's more of a kind of peacekeeping force. The EU, Poland in particular, has been sending some of its military equipment to Moldova, also selling it for discounted prices in order to strengthen Moldova's military potential. But in comparison, obviously, with Russia, it's still a very weak country, and it wouldn't be able to defend itself by itself. It would have to have other countries helping them, and that obviously puts them in a very precarious situation. So it looks at the moment that as Russia is busy with Ukraine, it could be perhaps a good window for Moldova to start those talks about joining EU, to start those talks about NATO. So to use that window of opportunity when Moscow's eyes are turned towards Kiev and Ukraine. So to use that destruction to their own advantage. Because we know that Russia is, in its aggression, is a very opportunistic country. So it's not going to go against the strongest ones. It's not going to go against Poland, but they're going to nitpick the really weak ones. And unfortunately, Moldova being such a tiny country, only 2.5 million citizens living there, is just such an easy target for Russia. So they have very limited time, and it looks like that's going to be the main challenge for Maia Sandu, is to get those reforms, to use that pro-European sentiment, which does exist in the Moldovan society at the moment, to use that sentiment in order to push through those reforms, to get Moldova closer to Western institutions.
It's like a race against time, basically. So we have really little time to prove to Moldovans that this path that they are choosing right now, as we speak today, is the right one. So obviously, also it's a case for Ukraine as well, because 30 years from the war, right, Moldova today faces still the same threat from Russia. And so it looked like as if Moldovans could just choose their own future, but it's not that easy, as we see. It depends on, to be seen also on the Alexander Stoyanoglu, right? What is his real stance? We hear from here today that he's saying that he's in favor of relationships with Moscow based on mutual benefits. What does it mean, right? How can we envisage those benefits from Stoyanoglu's point of view?
But he still has only 10% of support, so perhaps we won't need to find out. We'll see. We'll see if Maia Sandu indeed wins.
A word of comment, if I could, and putting that into context. 65% of Moldova's trade is with the EU, and only 3% is with Russia. So that's where economic interests of Moldova's lie. And whatever Alexander Stoyanoglu says, Moldova is already economically really closely tied to Europe, to the West.
Right. Well, I guess this is a great conclusion for our first section of our show. Now let's move on to Ukraine and Volodymyr Zelensky's victory plan. So Ukraine's victory plan is supposed to strengthen our state and strengthen our positions to be strong enough to end the war. And this is what Volodymyr Zelenskyy said in front of the Ukrainian parliament on Wednesday. And he also envisions that if the right steps are taken, the war could end in about a year. So before we discuss this, let's take a look at our report.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy laid out his victory plan for European leaders on Thursday, once again calling for more financial support.
Together we must stop this war, and together we must ensure the conditions for the kind of peace we need, Ukrainians, your nations, and all of Europe.
Addressing the leaders of the European Union's 27 member countries at a summit in Brussels, Zelenskyy also called for more military aid for Ukraine's fight against Russia's invasion.
We need to equip our brigades, lift all limitations, invest in Ukrainian defense industrial base and co-produce, and saturate Ukraine with air defense as soon as possible.
Zelenskyy also stressed the importance of detailing Ukraine's pathway to join NATO, urging leaders to back his call for an immediate invitation to join the bloc, to deal a decisive blow to Russian leader Vladimir Putin.
Now, the fact of an immediate invitation to Ukraine to join NATO would be decisive. Of course, membership would follow later. Putin just must see that his geopolitical calculations are worthless.
The plan also calls for permission to use Western weapons to strike deep inside Russia and a deterrence package in Ukraine to protect against threats from Moscow. Zelenskyy's plan comes at a critical moment in the war. As Moscow's forces advance in the east, a bleak winter of power cuts looms, and a U.S. presidential election casts uncertainty over the future of Western support.
So just today, Le Monde announced that the U.S. is no longer opposed to formally inviting Ukraine to join NATO. That's apparently following talks on Friday with leaders of Germany, France, and the UK. So Biden's visit to Berlin. This is an important shift, I guess, if it sort of translates into action on the ground. Perhaps Małgorzata would like to.
It is very important, but from when I was leaving home, I saw the big titles in YouTube and on different media that Zelenskyy threatens NATO with nuclear power, with nuclear weapon, because he also said that he has two ways of going, right? Either Ukraine will join NATO, or Ukraine will have to get back nuclear weapons. And this was like, when I saw those titles, I was actually really worried, because we all think what could tip the scale in America, that voters would vote for Donald Trump instead of Kamala Harris. And we know that Biden administration really is very, very active with keeping the democratic alliances alive, and we know that Kamala Harris will continue the Joe Biden policy. We have no idea what will Donald Trump do. From everything that he says, he will rather at least he will normalize the authority part of the way of thinking in the world. So I really am worried that whatever Volodymyr Zelenskyy says, of course my heart goes out to him, and he had every right to say anything, to be able to get other countries to be more serious. And obviously maybe it worked somehow with America, right?
Hardly.
But still, will those titles persuade some little, anti-Europe, anti-putting our soldiers fighting for NATO countries in Europe, Americans, to vote for Donald Trump? So I was kind of surprised that he did it today, not in 2.5 weeks, that because this is like how the information flows is very important, and how people read all kinds of informations.
But he ran out of time as well.
But for the American public, and for the world thinking that the Biden continuation of the presidency is important for the Russia not to win or lose, I am kind of worried. But it's a good thing for Ukraine, definitely. Just let's keep our fingers crossed that it will not tip the scale for Donald Trump winning the presidency, because there is a huge worry among American publics. Doesn't matter if they are voting for Democrats or Republicans, not to get involved our soldiers in Europe, in anywhere in the world, but especially in Europe. And if Ukraine joins NATO, this means that the American forces might be called to defend Ukraine. So I'm not saying that this is how it will happen, but that's how voters could think. So Donald Trump, who says that I will leave NATO if I don't like it, it could be the choice for some who are not decided. I'm just saying from
I think that in politics it's often all about words. And so perhaps Volodymyr Zelenskyy could have rephrased it, saying that, given the situation on the battlefield, which is gloomy as we know, and rightly so, thousands of new recruits coming to the front on the Russian side, and Ukraine running out of new forces, basically many Ukrainians left abroad. So now really Ukraine is in a very difficult situation on the battlefield on one hand. On the other one, NATO is not going to get into Ukraine. So what's left, right? He needs to look for a different option. And so this option in mind of Volodymyr Zelenskyy would be simply to be able to attack Russian soil and perhaps get the weapons to reach further targets in Russia. This is strongly opposed all the time by his Western allies and Western partners. But maybe Volodymyr Zelenskyy, by saying about the nuclear weapon that he's going to reach for, could somehow go back in history and remind the European public and the American public about this deal that was agreed upon, right? Western guarantees of securities, but Ukraine was about to renounce its nuclear weapons. That happened. And Americans maybe today don't remember that, right?
Yeah, but they don't really, they go for the titles.
Absolutely.
And the titles are very concerning.
He doesn't have influence. It's difficult to influence the opinion polls and the opinion public.
So let's go back to the actual victory plan, okay? I wanted to read out some of the points that of course, the ones that we know, because there are also 3 secret points, right? They were classified. So these are It was interesting, but I mean, we won't know that. But anyhow, so to join NATO was number one, to get more weapons. Number three, deterrence, then economic potential and post-war perspectives. So these are quite, I mean, this seems like a list of demands, not as a victory plan. And this is some of the criticism that Zelenskyy has been facing. Michał, how do you gauge this victory plan? What is your take on this?
I mean, he had to write something. Imagine you're a country, a president of a country, of a nation which is bleeding out, which is dying. There's a quarter fewer Ukrainians today than there were at the start of the war because of migration, because of the refugees, because of the deaths, because of all the tragic events. The economy of Ukraine is doing terribly. The country by itself just cannot sustain its economy. And Zelenskyy is doing what he has to do. He has to put up some kind of plan. The one that he did show us, it's a plan maximum. So he basically stated all the Ukrainian demands. He did it because he had to do it. But in the West, let's be honest, our viewers, there's no strategy. What we've been doing under President Joe Biden is just slowly, but drip by drip by drip, sustaining Ukrainian army in its place and allowing them to defend themselves. But there hasn't been any overarching plan. What do we do with this conflict? How do we resolve it? Where do we take it? Where are our red lines? The only red lines we were able to put are the red lines we put on ourselves. Because Chancellor Scholz, we're not going to send troops. Biden said, we're not going to send troops. So Putin was like, great, so I'm going to go in full in. So there has been no strategy, no plan, and this is something that is the main goal when it comes to international relations and to Kamala Harris, if she becomes the president, or to Donald Trump, is to put in place a plan. Because to continue this war, in a way it has been continued for the last almost three years now, is maybe to the benefit of, I don't know, China, maybe it also slightly to the benefit of the United States, because it allows the United States to continue its posture as the country, as the world's most important country, and slowly degrading Russia's economy. But here in Europe, we as Europeans, we want peace on our continent. And it's in our hands, and it's in our interest to bring peace as quickly as it is possible. So to put pressure on whoever is the next president of the United States to finally come up with some kind of plan, with some kind of solutions. Where do we want to take this conflict?
No one wants to.
Yeah, but Donald Trump says he has a plan. He will end it in 24 hours.
Before he even becomes president.
He becomes president, and Elon Musk, who Starlink helped Ukrainians to keep in contact, must even have some information. Because, I mean, to me, the involvement of Elon Musk in the whole process of electing Donald Trump that is happening for the last month or two is something incredibly concerning to everyone, and just we don't know how to behave, and suddenly, because it suddenly happened, and he really is the richest person in the world. He really is influenced by Russian propaganda, because obviously he became friends with Tucker Carlson, who is friends with Putin, who did this infamous interview of Putin being a cool guy. So I really think it's kind of in an interest of Democrats countries, or the free, thinking liberal democracies countries, that not